I was informed by the Russian Federation that this moment in history would happen in the halls of the Kremlin. So one cold day in December, I was picked up from my Moscow hotel room and I was driven through the streets of Moscow towards the Kremlin gates. But as we got to the gates, the car suddenly turned around and sped out through the streets of Moscow into a dark, bleak, Gothic forest. I thought I was going to get whacked. We arrived at the most sinister building I've ever seen in my life in the middle of the forest. It was his private residence, his private dacha. And as I got out of the snow, I looked and I saw a 2-story high security wall with snipers all the way along the top. And I looked down at my chest and I'm covered in orange dots. And then I feel a gun barrel pressed against the side of my head and I'm led into the building at gunpoint. I'm led into a room that's historic. This is the room where they dissolved the Soviet Union. And now it's Putin's office. So I waited. Doors open, and in comes Putin with an entourage. He has 2 translators who constantly whisper into his ear. He's got a whole team of political advisors and a whole gang of bodyguards. I nervously said to him, Mr. President, before we capture this moment in history, I've got a question to ask you. So they all turned to me and I said, well, I was brought up in England by my mom and dad, and they brought me up listening to the music of the Beatles. And I would like to know if you ever listened to the Beatles. They translate in his ear. There's some confusing looks amongst the entourage. And then Putin's mood drops. And in Russian, he orders the 2 translators and all his advisors out of the room immediately. The bodyguards stay. And then Putin turns to me, and in perfect English, he says, "Oh my God, I love the Beatles." I said, "I didn't know you spoke English." He said, "I speak perfect English." "Interesting," I said. "In that case, who is your favorite Beatle?" He said, "Paul." I said, "What's your favorite song? Is it Back in the USSR?" He didn't like that one very much. And then he says, "No, my favorite song is Yesterday. Think about it." And I thought about it. And I realized I'm being sent a subliminal message about the old days of power and authority of the Soviet Union through a Paul McCartney song. Now that connection I had with him allowed me in, and I ended up 1.5 inches away from his nose as I took this picture. I could feel his cold breath on my hand, and that's how I got the truth. The truth is that this is the cold face of power and authority in Russia, and then he performs power for me in his chair.